Hello and welcome to Politics and Societies of Southeast Europe. Our topic for today is religion, and the presentation for this week is going to be in 4 parts. First, I'm going to present some frames for understanding religion. Second, I'm going to have a short presentation talking about sources of the diversity of religions in Southeast Europe. And then in the final 2 sections, we'll be talking about relations between religion and politics, uses of religion, and some of this will be historical. Some of this will be looking at the topic politically. One of the things that we're going to talk about the most is the development of what in the literature you've read has come to be called political religion. That is the use of religion as a kind of stand-in or substitute or symbol or catalyst for political identities and for political activities. But I want to start off by giving you some frames for looking at religion in the modern period, and I'm going to give you 3 of them. First, I want to talk about the secularization thesis as it's presented by Jose Casanova. Second, I want to talk about the idea of civil religion as it's been developed by Robert Bellah and other people. And then next, I want to talk about political religion and how religion is used politically moving toward Southeast Europe. So let's begin by talking about secularization. The main proponent of the secularization thesis is the sociologist Jose Casanova. You can see his picture there on the slide. Fundamentally, what secularization deals with is not so much the prospect that people are becoming less religious and more secular. It's possible that that's happening, although there's also good evidence that that is not what's happening, and that especially in the contemporary period, many people may in fact be becoming more religious. But it's about separation of spheres of life, of the secular sphere from the religious sphere, so that religion comes to be confined more to the private sphere, and the secular sphere comes to contain more things like science, public institutions, governance, politics, and so on. And secularization is a phenomenon that accompanies the modernization of societies. It only becomes possible at the point when institutions that are not religious begin to develop, and also when societies become more complex and more diverse, and it becomes sensible to talk about multiple religions existing at the same time in the society without any one of them necessarily becoming dominant. So the most important elements of secularization, as far as we're concerned, is first of all, the separation of religion from the state. And you've probably heard this term used in the political context, separation of church and state. The implication being that there is a reversal of roles, that religion is no longer the power that legitimates and that regulates states, but it's the other way around. States in some way regulate religion. The second thing that happens is that diversity of religious belief ceases to be an object or a target of political power. So people who dissent from a majority view, who follow other religions, come to be thought of less as dissenters, less as heretics, and more as religious minorities toward whom the state adopts a posture of tolerance and of formal equality. As a parallel to this, as a corollary, we could say that under secularization in the modern period, states and religions tend to develop relatively independently of one another, although obviously there are many forms of mutual dependence. But let's talk about this process, where religion and the state become separate. Because one of the contradictions in this process is if you want to talk about the functions of religion in most environments, the main functions of religion are to do things like provide people with a framework for understanding lives, for giving contexts. When religion becomes less important, this role has to be taken by another institution, and that's where we move on to Robert Bellah. Robert Bellah argues that as states tend to become non-religious, and as some states become anti-religious, that as religion has a diminishing role in the public sphere and in the formal regulation of people's lives, then states often themselves take on some of the character of religion, and that secular rituals, secular symbols, secular processes take over many of the functions of religion so that the state itself becomes an object of worship. Now, I should say, this civil religion thesis was developed, at least in part, to explain non-religious and anti-religious states, like the states of state socialism, where you could see a very profound development of symbols of the state and of secular goals, like socialism, that took on a kind of religious character that became objects of worship, with figures of leaders who took on the character of objects of worship. But you can see this outside of authoritarian and totalitarian environments as well, in things like the reverence for flags, other national symbols, for dates in history, and in a mania for memorialization and so on. I'd say in contemporary European societies, secularism is a side of conflict, and what's at stake here is, I think, conflicts over identity and the extent to which religion is associated with identity, and in many respects, especially in societies where the political culture is overtly secular, the question is raised as to whether secularization is part of the national character and an object of worship, and then aggressive or open religious observance comes to be perceived as an opponent of this. Now, in the region with which we are concerned in study, we begin to talk about a phenomenon that is related, closely related to civil religion and Bella's idea of civil religion, but there are some differences, and that is political religion. Now, political religion occurs in environments where there is an assertion or reassertion of the political authority of religious institutions, and where religious institutions strive to become, and often succeed in becoming, symbols of the national state. What happens in this case is that it is not necessarily true that people become more religious in their beliefs or everyday practices or in their levels of observance, but what happens more is that the state becomes a kind of religion, and the state develops symbols to associate itself with religion. And so, if you want to look at political religion at work, you can see the construction of a tradition, a vision of history with heroes, martyrs, forms of remembrance, representations of collective identity, in which the national identity is associated with a religious identity. Similarly, you see the elevation of heroes, whether these are current and contemporary political leaders or political leaders who are memorialized in the past, into figures of exceptional value, akin to religious leaders and to figures out of the theology of religions. And you see invasive ritualization, the entry of religious means of expressing symbols into areas of everyday life that are not religious. So that, for example, in states where the dominant religion is Orthodox Christianity now, the Orthodox practice of associating a family with a particular saint extends itself to institutions, so that the university has a saint, the police have a saint, political parties especially have a saint. That is, some form of religious commemoration enters into the life of institutions that are not religious, and all of this is a part of a broader process that we can see as characteristic of the political and social life of all of the states of Southeast Europe, one in which religion is used as a political category, as a kind of stand-in for national identities or for ethnic identities, and in which religious institutions seek recognition, seek political power, seek benefit for themselves by claiming a monopoly over identity or a role as the protector of identities. This becomes especially complex in social environments like the states of Southeast Europe that are characterized by a high level of religious diversity, the coexistence side by side of demographically meaningful groups of people who are of different religions. And in the next segment, I want to talk a little bit about how that situation came about.